Apostle Barnes, back to you. You mentioned the issue of tithes. Now, this is it's a controversial, huge issue in the church. Tithing, giving. You say tithing is Old Testament, doesn't belong in the New Testament. Many pastors preach that tithing was started through Abraham before law, and so therefore it is of faith. So you tithe in faith. Are you saying that Christians shouldn't tithe in their churches?
That's exactly what we say, and that is what we look at it scripturally. We agree that tithing was pre-law. Tithing was initiated by Abram's generosity or thanksgiving, but also based on a culture practice at the time. Abram never tithed from his personal money or his personal possessions, because tithing was never money. It was always from the land, from the spoils. He tithed from the spoils of the enemy. That means I have to go rob a bank and tithe. But what you find then is that if God incorporated tithe into the law to be the Levite salary, because the Levites were the ones who served in the temple. But then there are two kinds of tithes also in the Old Covenant that we ignore. It was what is called the second and the third year tithe. Because the first time it was the Levite salary, the second time when they went into Canaan, the need shifted. And so 2 years they have to bring it to a place where God put his name, eat it up in his presence. Third year it became the tithe that goes to the temple where the priest is responsible. The Malachite tithe then was a tithe that went to the temple. So who misused it? Not the people, the priest. But then if you split the covenants properly, none of that was for us, because we as Gentiles were never part of the old covenant, as Paul correctly say in Ephesians chapter 2 verse 11. But then if you want to justify tithes in the New Testament, you are going to try first of all to find scriptures in the Gospels where Jesus speaks Matthew 23:23 to the Pharisees, where he say you should have done the one thing without leaving the other one undone, tithes and social justice. So if you take the issue of tithes, then you have to ask yourself, who is Jesus speaking to in Matthew 23:23? To the Pharisees. What were they under? The law of Moses. So they had to tithe. Jesus shifted things. The only place you can still try and justify tithes is to come to Hebrews 7. Now you have Abram, Melchizedek, you have the whole priestly order of Levi, then you have Jesus coming from Judah. Only the Levites could take tithes. Jesus come from Judah, so he does not qualify. But as you work the text progressively, you find that Jesus is a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, not based on the fact that he collects tithe, but based on the fact that he has no beginning and no end. He's eternal. But verse 18 gives the blow. Verse 18 says, because he only deals with one regulation in the whole of Hebrews 7 from 1 to 18. He says, for the former regulation, which is the tithe, was set aside because it was weak and useless. Therefore now we enter through a new way, and we speak now of a new covenant. Paul makes it clear. Why don't you see any tithes in the book of Acts? No tithes in all the epistles. How do you try and bring it up in Hebrews when he actually talks to Jews? Why does he have to convince Jews to tithe?
But you're not saying that Christians shouldn't give to the church.
That is where 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 speaks about the grace of giving. Because when you are under grace, you cannot be forced to do anything. Because grace giving now is giving by the Spirit. It is giving the way you are led. It is giving out of generosity. It is not giving forcefully. As long as you give your tithe, go through the world and see, the most dangerous tithers are the biggest strugglers. Because as long as you tithe and you put yourself and subject yourself to the law, you put yourself back under the curse. And so the giving of grace is a freedom now you have to give. Now I am free to give as I purpose in my heart. So we're not saying believers are exempted from giving, but we don't use gimmicks. We don't force you. We don't put guilt on you. We don't say if you don't tithe, you curse. No. How can I be cursed under the new covenant? We're simply saying now that you are in Christ, you have received grace. Release that grace as you feel led. Because everything under the new covenant is by faith, led by the Spirit. Anything that's in the flesh is not by the Spirit and is not of faith, because the law is not of faith.
Got it.